Tavens, Tavens.
Anybody have any conflicts with them? Okay, good. Minus the Ridge Preservation Review, does the board have any other comments or concerns or require any other information from the applicant before we move forward to a public hearing? Do we feel we have enough information to move forward, or? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, yes. I'm just, hold on, I'm just calendar. So. Actually, I think we do the 4th. So I'll do the 4th. So would you be able to, September be available September 4th? Actually, does that give us enough, doesn't give us enough time to notify the public hearing? We have to do the 18th, right?
No, it would, okay. It would give you enough time. This is not like a wireless application. They could advertise this. The only thing is that it depends if Dave's going to submit any additional materials with respect to the things that we asked for. I don't know if they're critical to the hearing. I think we could probably have it, but there's not enough time for him to submit materials to have it on that. If you want to have it on the public hearing based upon the materials that you have, and I think it's probably sufficient, you could do that. We'd still need the revised plans to include the things that we want, but we don't want to have is revised plans submitted just before the hearing, and that doesn't make sense. It's something the board hasn't looked at. If you feel comfortable having the plans that are before you now subject to public review and have a public comments, there's still time for them to submit revised plans later on, but I would suggest either you require they submit the plans and list it for the 18th, or you go with the plans that you have and list it on the 4th.
I like your second suggestion. Would you be able to get all your information in by the 4th, and then we can schedule you for the 18th for a public hearing?
Yeah, I think so. It sounds like if we do that, you already have the plans.
I think there's some information you.
If we do it on September 18th, okay, by September 4th, what I'd suggest is submit a plan that has the areas, the adjacent, area on there, and maybe take a look through the report, and if there's anything else that you could supplement, if that typo, if I'm correct on that, you fix that, make whatever changes there are. You'll submit it by the 4th. We would give a report to the board, probably be very minimal, the report, because it's just saying they're complying with what we requested, and we'd have it listed for the 18th as a public hearing. Okay? That's the plan.
I make a motion that we schedule a public hearing for September 18th.
I second it.
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, thank you. The board is going to take a brief recess to go into attorney-client meeting to receive counseling on pending applications. So excuse us for a few minutes. No, we gotta go outside. I should. Rockin' Man, 24 Catskill High Rail, review and discuss revised site plan submitted for a proposed school in Ridgecrest to be located within an existing single-family dwelling and parking area. Said property is located at 24 Catskill High Rail in Central Valley and is known in the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 254, Block 7, Lots 2.
Good evening. John Williams from Blanket Gully Engineering, the applicant. So here with me tonight is Joanne, its representative. Our counsel, Steve Marshall. We're before you tonight. We haven't been back here in quite some time. We last left you closing a shul mikvah, 24 Catskill High Rail, in an existing single-family home. We have come to you with a plan that involved a lot that's next door to the house on the corner that was previously owned by the developer, but also for dedication to the town, either way, it was all for dedication. Therefore, it could be made part of our application. That's where we had our original parking lot for the shul. We approached the village board, who I believe was not interested in relinquishing relinquishing the offer of dedication, so therefore we removed it from the application. And we're proposing a small parking area in the back of the shul for 9 cars. The rest of the application was amended for the request of the waivers based upon the loss of that area of the lot. I believe we've submitted a report to the board that would outline our burden for the waiver request. That's really what we're here tonight to go through that, see where we end up with that. The plan we did was a sketch plan. We have some work to do, but we're really looking to get some direction on those waiver requests first before we really tackle the main engineering design. I've taken a look at it. It does look like the parking lot work there, sort of combination of grading. It's not exactly what the applicant was hoping for, but because of the loss of the dedication part, so that it's really more accurate.
Mr. Lindsay.
Okay. Based on what John said, I'm not going to go through the details of the site plan and that sort of information. We gave them our comments. If the board has any questions on it, I'll answer that. I think the threshold issue here is the one of zoning, that both uses are permitted in the zone. However, when you apply the place of worship and you put the two uses on one zone, you end up with a lot that was built for residential dwelling and now is being used for another purpose, and it doesn't have the required area, it doesn't have the required width, it doesn't have some of the other requirements, including coverage, and so there are a number of waivers that are necessary for the applicant, or they're requesting. The board does not grant variances. However, your code does have a provision in it for a substantial burden upon the applicant's religious exercises, and when this places a substantial burden that they've proven to you, then the board does have the authority to grant waivers if it would otherwise interfere with their religious practices, as far as I understand it, and Rick will advise you a little further on that. The reason it was not listed, we had it listed originally for the June meeting. We had reviewed the technical aspects and provided a report. The only thing that we did not have at that time was a narrative on the impacts on the substantial burden question. They have now submitted something on that from their attorney, and I'm not going to opine on that. I'm simply going to say that you have that, and it describes what they consider the substantial burden on this property. And we can identify, and I think I have, mostly the waivers that they're requesting. They're requesting a waiver for area. They're requesting a waiver for lot width, for front yard, for side yard. The specifics are enumerated, and I don't think it's necessary to read all the numbers in the memo that we provided. For the side yard, for 2 side yards, 1 side yard, for the rear yard, and for coverage, as well as parking. Your code provides you to allow, for certain reasons, to waive up to 25% for any applicant. They're asking you to have a waiver where it would be 50%. There's 22 spaces provided, where 11 are proposed, and they're suggesting they can't provide, or they're telling you they can't provide that on their property, and they want to provide that any overflow parking or those parking spaces on street. And I think that's all I have, unless you have any questions of me.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Elizabeth? Jonathan, I know you have.
Yes, we wrote a memo on this on June 13th, and I'll try to stick to those points and just sort of expand on what Dennis just said. In our memo, on our point number 3, it is true that the planning board can waive certain standards for a place of worship, examining the potential burden on the exercise of religion. But our understanding is that's only to those standards that are in the bulk table. That language appears in the bulk table and refers to the bulk standards in the bulk table, such as lot width, lot area. But in our analysis on our point 5, we found that there are a series of landscaping standards that are not in the bulk table. They are in section 310-27 of the zoning code, which is about tree removals and landscaping. If they aren't going to meet those or asking not to meet those, we think, and we defer to the attorney's opinion on this, but it appears to us that they would need variances from the ZBA rather than a waiver from the planning board for those specific sections of the code. Also, if there are other parking requirements, and if the parking spaces are within required yards, that's also in a different place in the code. The size of the yards and the size of the setbacks are in the bulk table. So that is something that we would like more information about, because the plans at the moment don't meet the landscaping standards in 310-27 section of the code. I think that is the part of my report that amplifies what Dennis gave me.
Thank you, John. Do you want to respond to him now, or you want to?
Actually, I didn't get a copy of that. Can I get a copy of this memo by any chance?
Sure. I think I hope I sent this to you in June, but I'm happy to give you this copy. This is my copy.
Just to clarify what Jonathan is saying, is that clearly there is a provision in your bulk table that allows you to waive anything in the bulk table if the applicant can demonstrate that it would be a substantial burden on the exercise of the religion. There isn't that same waiver provision necessarily with respect to everything in the code. That doesn't mean that there may be provisions in the code that might be a substantial burden, but it doesn't fit into your jurisdiction with respect to waivers. I have to look at it, quite frankly, as I advise the board, to see whether or not there are other provisions in the code that would allow some waiver of those particular provisions that are being referenced by Jonathan. But what we would like tonight is the input from the applicant as to, with respect to those fairly discrete items, whether you're asking for relief from those or whether or not you're going to be able to comply. For instance, there's one dealing with some landscaping, which it appears your lot would be able to go ahead and accommodate. I don't readily see a substantial burden issue with respect to that. So if you're going to comply with that, then that's fine. So really, we just wanted your input on those things, and if you want to defer to the next meeting, that's fine. One of the things that you should know is that we've received the letter, and although I disagree with some of the broad conclusions that were done, because I think the holdings and the principles are more nuanced than that, I've advised the board as to their role with respect to the waiver and the substantial burden and how the court cases have addressed similar type issues. They are going to weigh that in their minds and make their determinations on those waivers at the next meeting. They're also willing to go ahead, if the applicant wishes, to set a public hearing for the next meeting as well. So it's not, we don't want to hold this up, we want to move the project forward, but they're not ready tonight to make their final determination on those waivers, but they will at the next meeting. Jonathan's point is a little bit different. It's those non-bulk table items that he has identified in that June memo. And if you are able to respond tonight, that's great. If you want to submit something in response between now and the next meeting, that will also be fine. Doesn't sound like it's on.
There you go.
Thank you so much. There we go. Oh my, that sounds like I'm in an echo chamber here. My name is Stephen Barshaw, counsel for the applicant, and a pleasure to be with you. I don't believe I've been before this board before, so it's nice to be here. Came over the mountain from Haverstraw, didn't find that there was any traffic on the hill, so life was good. Yes, we would like the opportunity to clarify these things. I don't think that we saw that June memo until a couple of days ago, so there are some questions that are raised in it that we would like to look at and respond to. I just want to be sure that I'm narrowing, or we've narrowed the issues as to where there is a question about the board's jurisdiction. As I understand it, there's no dispute or disagreement that the board has the power to waive all of those items that are referenced in the bulk tables. And the only question that's open is as to matters that are not addressed in the bulk tables. A, does the board have the authority to waive, and if so, under what circumstances and conditions? And Rick and I will speak about that. Certainly we'll try to come to an understanding together, because it's always easier for the board when both attorneys are on the same page. So we will try to get onto the same page and do that. The one thing I would like to be sure that you do understand, and then I respect that you'll make your determination about burden at the next meeting, is that this is a rather funny situation that the applicant finds itself in. Wasn't really looking to even get any parking waivers, as I think you all know. There's a parcel that had been proposed for some time to be the place where parking would be provided, but the respective, the village board has, and I'm not going to get into the legalities of it, that's for them to deal with, had determined that that property, which we believe has no valid public purpose any longer, it's not going to be used for any utility, that the village doesn't have the right to take it as a dedicated property. We'll fight that out with the village board, but this applicant needs to move forward and just can't wait around forever. And I also want to let you know that we're in court. There's also a question of whether or not the violation has occurred in terms of this property. So we have to move this application forward, and so the only thing that was left is to say, okay, well, we'll request a waiver, which is why the parking waivers are in front of you. Nothing would make me happier than to see this application go forward with the appropriate parking waivers, so that at least as to this issue, of putting aside whether the dedication is right or wrong or indifferent, but at least this shul can be legalized and can operate properly and in accordance with the code. So that's why we're here. We'll do our best to find a way to not have landscaping be an issue. And as far as whether or not parking-related requirements where parking goes into yards and so forth, we may be in a bit of a gray area here that we have to talk about, because again, this isn't the applicant on its own saying, oh, this is what I want to do. We've been kind of pushed into this position, and that may be a little bit of a different situation than what has been before the board previously. So Rick and I will talk about that and see what we can work out.
One point on that, and I think that's fine. And I know that you're aware of this, but just for the record, we're talking about more than the parking waiver. There's the lot area waiver that's needed, lot coverage, lot width, and setback.
Right.
In addition to the parking.
And I assume that those are ones that are referenced in the bulk requirements.
Yes.
Right, so that those are at least waivable by...
That's correct.
Okay. So I think we are on the same page. It would be great if you'd set a public hearing. That would be very much appreciated. I think that would help move this thing forward. I don't think there's any reason to delay it. And certainly that would be something we would request as well.
I have just a couple more issues with respect to this application. One, at a prior meeting, I don't know whether there's a member of the public or a member of the board, I just can't recall. But it was raised as to the fact that the HOA agreement covering this home as well as all the other homes in that area, whether there was a prohibition in the homeowners agreement with respect to places of worship being prohibited, right? And I looked at that simply to answer the question. The answer to the question is yes, the homeowners agreement does have a prohibition on using a home for a place of worship, but my advice to the board is that that's irrelevant to your determination, just as any deed restriction would be irrelevant to your determination. It's a private matter between anybody you would have standing to address that issue and the HOA. And so we'll leave that to that, but I wanted to state clearly on the record that that's not going to be part of your decision-making with respect to this matter.
And if I could, that's my understanding of the law as well. Exactly, perfectly stated.
The next thing is that seeker, and we can move this project forward with respect to seeker. The board can declare its intent to serve as lead agency, and we can type it as unlisted. We do need, however, an EAF for this.
Okay.
Typically, with applications where there's a lot of moving parts, we would prefer a full EAF, although it's a little bit more burdensome, it's not terribly so.
That's okay.
Okay. So please submit that. But this evening, even without that EAF, I believe the board can declare its intent to be lead agency and type the action as unlisted. As mentioned before, we'll probably set a public hearing. And just finally, that under GML 239, that it appears that there's no triggers here that would require this to be referred to the county under General Municipal Law, Section 239-M.
Before I make a motion that this board declares itself, intends to declare itself as lead agency, and we type the action as unlisted.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Just want to get that out of the way so we don't forget. Okay. You guys good with, John?
Just a quick thing, just to be very specific for the record, the provision in the code that says you're not allowed to park in the front yard, in any front yard, no parking spaces, is section 310-40E. And it says no off-street parking shall be permitted within a required front yard in any district. So I think that, you know, there's that you have to consider that that's not in the bulk table, so you have to put that on the list of things that you have to determine how would they be addressed.
So at the end, questions, sir, for the applicant?
No.
No. No, thank you.
Here I go. No. Just some housekeeping things. Excuse me? Okay. On the original map that, when you first appeared, The owners were Woodbury Central LLC and 24 Catskill Rail. And we were told that, I think you purchased it from Woodbury Villas. But now on your most recent map, it says the recorded owners are Woodbury Villas A LLC.
I'll have to confirm that could have been, because we were switching maps, it might have been reverted back to the original map.
Okay.
The second parcel.
Because if it's the LLC, then I think, don't we need a new LLC form then?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll confirm if it's changed, we'll get a new LLC, if it's not, we'll fix it.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay, that's all I have right now.
That's it? You're good? With provision 18, the hours of operation, this is going to be like Millville Lane, High Holy Days, what's going to be different here?
No, this is gonna be, full-time only.
Okay.
So, there is a copy and paste, there's an error on note 18. It's really during the week there'll be services, and then it will keep on the weekend, just like normal.
Okay.
This will be continuous. That's why we proposed the full amount of parking, because this will be used
Continuously.
continuously.
You'll get, so you can update the next submittal, you'll update the
We'll
note.
update that and get that cleared up. That's also why we proposed the 9, as many spaces as we get, because during the week typically, you're gonna have 10 to 12 would be the usual attendance.
Okay.
So that's why we're trying to limit that 9 parking space, 10 parking space number, because that will accommodate the weekly. And when we get to the weekend, it'll be, basically full, the 30 parking, but
That's walking on the
that's
weekend.
the walking on the weekend, so we wouldn't really need.
Now, no plans for like a school or, okay, just prayer and bath and, okay.
Sure.
And childcare, not a, just gotta ask. Anybody else?
I was waiting for Rich and then I was going to circle back. Oh, okay. John, with the parking, is that going to be both on Adelaide Fairway and Catskill High Road?
Well, no, the only thing on Catskill High Road will remain is the driveway.
Okay.
And then the driveway serving the residents.
Okay.
And then on Adelaide, it would be 9, that's what we're proposing in the spaces.
Both sides?
Just the one side.
Okay. I mean,
Here's Catskill,
right?
paved driveway that exists
Right.
will remain, and then Adelaide's here, a parking lot there. So, I don't know.
Right, but on the street, you're talking, didn't you say there's going to be on-the-street parking? Or,
Balance will be made up with on-street parking.
right, and that's my question. You can park on both sides of that street, right?
Yes.
If that was done, is that street wide enough for emergency services to get through?
I believe it is 24-foot wide street, so no.
John,
not the
I'm gonna
village
take-
standards, right?
I'm going to have to take a look back in the WP3 approval. I thought that it was one side of the street parking. I'm going to have to look back and,
It'd be even better, because if there were both sides,
Well, that's,
I
I mean,
have a
could-
recollection that we were going to put the parking on the opposite side of where the fire hydrants were, so that we didn't lose as many spaces.
so that would be the opposite side.
Yeah, and I thought that there was also the same thing for sidewalks. The sidewalks were on the side with fire hydrants, but I got to take a look back, because I don't see that, so.
Yeah, I don't see any sidewalk on the fire hydrant side.
I don't see any sidewalk shown at all.
Yeah.
So I'll take a look back at that and let the board know.
so then would signage be appropriate on that?
Yes.
Okay.
And signage we can make as part of a condition of the approval, right, Rick? Or is that
Let
a
me
stick
take a
here
look,
because it's an
because
HOA?
I think what it would be is if we had it in the original approval, then it probably was in there. It's just a matter of implementation of an existing site plan requirement,
Okay.
which probably hasn't been put in.
Nobody else on the board has any other questions for the applicant?
No.
Once,
was all
twice,
mine.
3 times the length. Now, Rick, with regards to the public hearing, I know there's a little research you need to do. Would the 4th be too soon, or?
The research I have to do with respect to the potential authority of the planning board to waive the non-bulk requirements, it will not take a long period of time. So the September 4th would be fine. The real question is, does the board need more than the 4th to consider the waiver issue for purposes of the bulk table? Do you need to the 18th for that to occur, or are you comfortable with the 4th?
How does the?
Before you opine on that, I just tell you one thing. Most of the items that we have under site plan were not changed to site plan dramatically. The only one we have in there is the grading through the line. I don't know how they're going to address that, and I don't know if you need that information before you go to the public. Is it going to be a wall or?
Most likely be a wall in this corner.
Okay, so there'll be some changes there. There'll be a wall. There'll be some visual impact from the wall. It's just whether you need that information before going to the public hearing.
Well, I think if the landscaping is going to be required, then it would require a resubmittal that we would want to have before the public. So I think that's what it goes to.
Why don't we do this? I think this would be an orderly way to deal with it. John, if you would revise the plans and submit those by September 4th, that way the public would have the benefit of any wall that would be put in there and can comment on that to help inform the planning board's decision-making. Also, what I'm proposing is that before the 4th, we advise, or we have discussions between Stephen and I with respect to what they may be going ahead and complying with, so that they can put those on the plans as well. That would also be subject to that, and to the extent that they're not, I will be advising you and your ability to waive them. That all can be done prior to the 4th, so we can have, I think, a proper revised plan by then. Gives you more time to determine your determinations with respect to the waiver on the bulk items, and we would have set the public hearing for the 18th.
Thank you. That's 3 public hearings on the 18th. Be a long day.
Longer than today? Longer than today?
Oh, this is nothing.
It's up to the board if they want to approve it or not. I'll make a motion that we schedule a public hearing for this application for the September 18th meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, so we'll see you then, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Nate? Stephen, you'll reach out to me?
I was meeting 10:30 last night. Public comes out in masses out there. Public hearing goes up, 5, 10, 15.
Next up, Avalon, discuss and review proposed lot line change and site plan to construct a 4-story, 130-room hotel at 94 Turner Road in Central Valley. Said property is known as the Village of Woodbury Tax Map, Sections 226, Block 1, Lot 5, and 6.2.
You need to just bring a change of jacket.
Lincoln Valley's got the corner on the market here.
All right, good evening, sir. How are you again? How are you? Good. Before you begin, we do have a memo from the code enforcement officer with regards to frontage and his interpretation.
Oh, okay.
You know, we're giving it to you tonight, so we're not expecting you to comment on it this evening, but it's just something going forward that we'll need to address.
Okay. I'll begin anyway. Good evening, everyone. John Quaid from Lang & Cully Engineering. We're the engineer for the applicant. Also here with me tonight is Mr. Paul Oliveira. He's the applicant for Avalon Building Systems. Christina Donna, counsel for the applicant from Silverberg and Zelantis. And David Hildebrand, he's from the Wyndham Hotel Group. Will be supplying our hotel hopefully for this site. So we're before you tonight with an application. It's got a couple moving parts to it. I'll go over it hopefully in some detail as to what we're doing on the site, and then I'll turn it over to Christy, where she'll discuss some of the parking waiver that we'd be seeking from you, and we'll get into that in detail. And then anything regarding the actual hotel design, aesthetics, operations would be both David and Paul.
Authority, we're looking at,
Property's located both on New York State Route 32 and Turner Road. So we're at that intersection of Turner Road and Route 32 is right here. And the application consists of two parcels. The first parcel is the triangular parcel in the front. It was the old diner. It's now the karate studio. And that building is existing. That's located right at this spot right here. The second part behind that, I'll just yell, if you can't hear me, just like that. Second parcel is behind that. It's along Turner Road. Right now, it's currently a vacant parcel, and that would be the proposed hotel site. And so the first part of this application is I called it a lot line change in my letter. Could be a subdivision, re-subdivision, or we title it, but it would be to take the first parcel and strike a new lot line or a lot line change here, providing 100 foot of access from 32 into this parcel to Turner, and then merging it with this parcel here. It's about a change of a 1 acre, 1.1 acres from the karate studio to the Turner Road. What that would do in turn is it makes his lot go from 2 point something acres to change down to 1.1, and our parcel goes up to roughly 4 acres. That's step one of what we're going to do. And step two is once that action, which would go with the site plan, is done, our proposed entrance drive then would be from 32 down this way, across and into the site. The hotel would be sited here. Familiar with Great Commons, obviously, or is this over here this way? Corporate Drive comes around this way, back to 32. Again, this is the Turner Road. Siting the hotel here with circulation around 2 ways around, and then 2 ways around the supplemental parking lot down in the lower portion of the site. Site slopes, this is pretty much generally flat, as you probably drive by it every day, so you tell you pretty much generally flat. Our site slopes from front to back to the rear, where it drops off, and then back here, where the factories are, and some warehouses, there's a little line, wetland area there. That's all from our property. We are proposing a 4-story, 130-room hotel. It's a limited service hotel, meaning it's just rooms. There's no banquet halls. There's no on-site restaurant. There's no conference center. It's basically what they consider a limited service hotel, which is you have a breakfast nook just for the guests, and just regular hotel amenities. There'll be a patio outside, a pool, fitness center. But it's all for the guests. There's no extra ancillary items that go with this hotel. Based upon that, we have the layout. We're proposing 145 parking spaces for the complex, which is 1 for every room, plus an additional 15 for, that would include staff and certain overflow. The other item that we've also incorporated into the plan is off the access drive, we've reserved an area for bus parking. We have 6 spaces there. And that is, our hope is to have 4 buses come in, through the commons, what goes on there. 4 buses will come and stay at the hotel, so we would reserve an area for those buses. We would expect, if we had all 6, we'd be doing very well, because we'd be 100% booked. So that's how we came up with that number there. Site would be serviced by water and sewer from the 32 and Turner Drive. There's a sewer main that extends from here. There's also one here. We would extend to that, and the water we would bring in from 32 along our proposed access drive. We're before you tonight with a conceptual plan. It's a little further than that, but we didn't get into real detailed engineering design. What we really wanted to talk to the board about tonight is we've amended this plan to meet the new hotel overlay zone. So both parcels are in the LC zoning district. And then once we apply the hotel, it becomes part of the hotel overlay zone. So we've applied what we've done to that law in this plan, meaning you incorporate landscaping buffers on all sides of 15 feet. That's been provided. We're also doing landscaping on both sides of our entrance drive-in. The only provision of the code which we would be seeking relief from you is for the parking. We have met the old code parking requirements. And what we're thinking is, and Christie will go into this in a little further detail, is because we're a limited service hotel,
The industry standard is typically 1 space per room. So we've met that, which was your old code, we've met that. And then what we've done is we provided slightly more parking. We set aside the 15 spaces for employees, which we estimate wouldn't be more than 6 or 7 at the largest shift. And then we have a balance of another 6 or 7 additional parking spaces on top of that. That combined with the bus parking, because if we get 1 tour bus in, we're gonna be probably 30 or 40 rooms full right off the bat. We wouldn't need 30 or 40 spaces per se. So that's how we're kind of balancing that out. It also makes for a much nicer plant around here. We have landscaping islands, breaks up the pavement a little bit more, and it seems to work. So what we're requesting is an 11% waiver, from 163 to 145 as part of this plan. So that's really why we're before you tonight. I think the other elephant in the room is the access. And I saw that, I don't want to get to fully read it, but I'm hoping we come to some resolution. So I'll turn it over to Christie. She'll go through the parking with you, and you can touch upon the front access.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Christie Adonis, Silver First Lines. I talk pretty loud too, so hopefully everyone can hear me. John actually went into the parking in a good amount of detail, so I won't take up too much of your time. But I know you were talking about parking and waivers in your previous application, but this is a different concept. I'm sure you're aware of it. In section 30140C of your code, it authorizes this board, it gives considerable deference to this board actually, to waive parking up to 25% in circumstances where it's deemed appropriate. And we're asking for considerably less than that, with only 11%, where 163 would be required, and we're asking for 145 spaces. And as John explained, that is because of the nature of the type of facility and the services that are going to be provided, and that it's going to be very narrowly tailored to only the guests that are going to be registered guests staying at that hotel. No one's going to be coming in from off-site to utilize any of the facilities, because frankly, they won't be available to people that are outside of the hotel. They're not going to have any sort of kitchen where there are going to be cook staff that are going to be preparing food, and consequently, there probably wouldn't be a need for room service, so the staff is going to be relatively small as well. And so we are providing sufficient parking for 1 spot per room, which is the industry standard, and it's also still used in other codes in the area, including the towns of Muncie and Chester. And so we're hoping that we can carry that over into this application in what we think will be more than satisfactory parking. And because we don't want to have to add more parking that's not going to be necessary and is just going to remain vacant space, because that's just additional impervious coverage that isn't necessary. And as John mentioned, it allows for more room for landscaping. And given the interest that in the marketing techniques that the applicant is going to be looking at different tours and tour buses and charters that are going to be ideally bringing buses of people, anyone who's coming in on those buses naturally is not going to be bringing their cars, isn't going to be using the parking lot, but is still going to be utilizing the hotel. So that would be quite the offset, especially if they have a need for as many bus parking spaces, being the 6 spaces, as they're looking for. Because of the nature of the parking and how that kind of drives how this application goes forward, we did want to see if we could get a sense from this board, hopefully a positive one, as to whether you would be amenable with us proceeding with this waiver request in mind, so that if the other items can be worked out and discussed and addressed, that we can move forward with the plans with the proposed parking as is, as opposed to having to try to reevaluate to create parking that we don't believe is necessary, and that would hinder our ability to move forward with the application until we can sort of come to some sort of resolution on that.
Good. Okay, all right. Who wants to go first?
Jonathan Lockman from NPV Village Planners. We prepared a memo on August 16th, And at the beginning, we went over the provisions of the new hotel overlay zone. In our first comment, we were concerned about the definition of lot and whether this access really met the hotel overlay code. And we said we would defer to the planning board attorney's opinion, and the building inspector really has the last word on these things. But in the letter that we just got from the building inspector, he was concerned about the standard that the hotel would have to have direct access. My concern was more that I didn't see how you could create a lot that went through or over Turner Road and have it be considered the same property. But anyway, that will have to be worked out with the building inspector, and we'll defer to the, of course, as we should, to the building inspector on that. In the bulk tables, one of our comments was we thought it was a little unclear about the, we saw some places that the two pieces were 4.08 acres, but if you added them, I came up with 4.12. There's some small discrepancy there. You could clarify that. In the landscaping, we felt that you did meet the 15-foot wide landscape buffer that's in the hotel overlay, but that in our comment 4 was street trees are required along street frontage, so we felt those would be required both along Route 32 and Turner Road. Also on the parking lot islands, I didn't see a calculation. You're supposed to have 10 square feet of interior landscaping and 1 2.5-inch caliper tree for 10 parking spaces. You may have met that, but I'd just like to make sure that standard is met. We were worried about a little bit about the circulation pattern and how buses coming in would be dropping off people the doors on the right side of the bus, but they're going to be coming up to the door with the left side of the bus parallel to the building. And but I think, and we have the traffic engineer here tonight who'll probably talk more about this, but we were a little concerned about buses and trucks doing the turns all around the building to get out after they drop off. Also, the loading berths weren't next to the building, and had some concern about that. Also the site distance along Route 32 for the new drive. There's a bit of a curve just to the north, so we were a little concerned about that. But we'll sure that will get further review. On the parking requirements, we really felt pretty supportive of your waiver request. It's certainly 11% is within the board's jurisdiction if they're inclined to work with you on that. That may be the case, but as an alternative to the waiver, the planning board can also require them to provide banked or reserved area parking that they don't build, that's left in reserve in case it turns out they do need more parking and there'll be a place on the plan where it can be installed. That's an alternative to either giving them the waiver they're requesting or requiring the full amount of parking. Under seeker, we need to know the total square footage of the hotel, but if it's 4 stories, based on that footprint, it looks like that design would be somewhere around 60,000 square feet, which is under the secret threshold for type 1. So it'd be unlisted and involved agencies that is going to be very concerned about new drives in that area is the DOT. I think that I'll turn it over to Dennis for engineering comments.
All right, well, we gave the applicant a detailed technical memo, which I'm sure they'll address a number of these items as the process proceeds. I'll only zero in a couple of items because I think Jonathan covered a lot of it. I think there probably is a subdivision map required. I don't know if this meets our definition for boundary line change. I think that's more a matter of form over substance. It's going to be the same thing no matter, and you have public hearings anyway. But I think that'd be safer the way to proceed. The access and frontage on Route 32 is a critical issue that's required under the new hotel overlay zone. Gary has opined on that. This is the first such instance he's had to on that. It's a brand-new law. I'm sure he's wrestling with the issue as well. So I think that's a matter that's going to have some further discussion to make sure that he's on comfortable ground, that there's nothing else that you have that he hasn't considered in that request. In terms of the parking, we too looked at the parking. We listed a number of the items of your code requirements. It is within your jurisdiction, as Jonathan said, and I think that John may want to opine on that as well, depending upon the uses in the hotel, and it looks like it's going to be tailored down basically to the patrons of the hotel, and the parking may be limited in terms of what the overall code looked at when it defined 1.25 spaces per room. We made some comments on the loading berths. I'm not sure if the locations are appropriate or not. I think that's something you ought to look at. Depends how you're going to use those, and we probably want to have some further discussion on that, unless you can simply comply with what we've suggested, and that is moving it closer to the building. There are design standards in the code that were developed in the hotel overlay to make sure that the hotel functions as a hotel, and it sounds like that intends to be your use. Those restrictions refer to kitchen facilities, prohibition of non-transient tenants, the numbers of rooms connected, and it was all through a deliberation and consideration by the Village Board of Trustees with input from the Planning Board. So you may wish to take a look at the floor plans to make sure that things like that comply. Maybe a sample floor plan would satisfy you on that. This should be referred to your ESOs at an early date so that they can opine on the circulation pattern, the traffic pattern, and make sure that they can respond to emergencies. The applicant has indicated this is a sketch plan, that there's more details required. Particular stormwater management, I assume it's going to be underground, but there's really nothing there now, and we'd want to see that when we can. ARB, this is going to be a large structure. It is, as the planning board noted to the Board of Trustees, it's fairly close to your residential areas. I'm sure you're going to want to have some input early on in the architecturals and to make sure that it fits in the area. So that'll be a requirement as this proceeds. And lighting and landscaping fall into that same vein too. You're going to want to have adequate lighting so that it's safe for the patrons that use the facility, but not glowing in the sky like the Yankee Stadium. And so you're going to have a dark sky friendly appearance for the hotel. Other than that, if you have any questions on the report, I'd be happy to answer them, and I'm sure the applicant will take a look at the details that we had in there.
Anybody have any questions for Dennis?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The 1.25 spaces per room, that was a code that recently passed. Seems like a lot of parking. Seems like 163 spaces for this site would be a lot of parking.
I think that my suspicion is that, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that what they were trying to accomplish is to accommodate all kinds of uses at a hotel, which could have banquet facilities, could have meeting rooms, could have seminars at the same time that they have patrons there. So it could be more than the number of rooms. If you're going to have a different type of use, then it might be a reason for you to exercise the discretion that's given to you for a 25% reduction, and that's the argument that they're making.
When the Board of Trustees decided to redo the regulations, during its seeker process, it engaged a planner to assist with it, and that planner went around and did surveys of numerous other jurisdictions and general industry-wide standards with respect to parking in hotels, and the end result was to take that advice, modify it somewhat, and come up with what they have. So there was a real purpose behind it, but as Dennis said, there's always assumptions being made by this, and I think the assumption is that we want to ensure for full-service hotels that there's enough parking so that we don't have a full-service hotel that there's a small amount that's required, and then it ends up that it spills over into other streets.
Any other questions for Mr. Collins?
Most of my comments have already been indicated. I would support in lieu of a waiver in this particular case, showing the fact is that the sufficient park could be provided with land banking. I have no reason to believe that it couldn't be. There's going to have to be some discussion with DOT because they're going to be reluctant to put another driveway out onto 32. And they may be looking at some treatment at Turner Road where it comes into 32 at the north end, which has always been a problem. I would recommend that some kind of a traffic analysis at the driveway be provided with respect to this site, indicating the current volume of traffic, other developments that could occur on the corridor, as well as the anticipated volume generated by this facility with or without the bus traffic. I concur with Jonathan with respect to the circulation. There's a number of different things that can be done to the site to improve the circulation. And in addition, since this is going to be a 4-story hotel, there should be some kind of an emergency access provided, at least either north side or south side, in order to get a secondary access into that site. Because if the main driveway is blocked with a 4-story building, you want to be able to get the emergency vehicles in. Again, that has to be dealt with the emergency services within the village. So those are the general comments preliminarily. Once the issue of the frontage is resolved, then, which I think is the critical issue or key issue, then everything else has to fall in as part of the site plan review.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, I'll be brief with respect to mine. It's just with respect to seeker. The applicant had submitted a short EAF. I believe that you should require the applicant to submit a full EAF, and upon receipt of that full EAF, we can go ahead and distribute it. I think tonight you can start the seeker process rolling by declaring your intent to be lead agency and to type the action as unlisted.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a motion that this board declares itself as lead agency and lists as a
Intent to be lead agency.
intent to be lead agency.
I second it. Whoop.
Oh, we're in a hurry tonight. All in favor?
It's getting late.
Aye? Okay.
Yeah.
And also type it as unlisted.
We'll type it as unlisted.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good. And then you'll get us the full EAF also? Okay. All right, do we have any questions?
If I,
Yeah.
I'd like to have David Hildebrand speak, he's the grant, so if you just go over and tell us what it's going to eventually look like, just leave that information.
Okay.
And then after that, I just want to touch on this road frontage.
And you also were here tonight because you want to get this board's feeling on the parking, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation with this. My name is David Hildebrand. I'm Director of Architecture and Design for Wyndham Hotels. To answer some of the questions, I understand that Quintas does not have a very strong presence here in the Northeast, and incidentally, there may not be a ton of information as it relates to the aesthetic. And so I just wanted to explain, first of all, we're very excited to work with Paul to get some new construction product here in the Northeast. Close by, just north, we have Clifford Park, which opened a couple of years ago. And I just wanted to show a little bit about the design intent of all of our new construction properties. The design of this prototype is called the Del Sol. It was created in 2015 as a result of when the reimage the look of the brand and the feel of the brand. La Quinta, as you know, is a Spanish name for a home or residence, and it actually can be interpreted a couple different ways, but that's how the brand identified it, and that's where the Spanish name came from. Incidentally, it had a Spanish architecture from its inception all the way up until about 2008, when we came up with a new, more modern design, more conducive to American standards, just in time for nobody to be able to afford to build it. And so incidentally, come 2015, we reimaged the brand completely and go with a more modern aesthetic, still relevant to current standards and things, but more modern feel, more updated materials and so forth. And so this prototype, since 2015, when the first one was opened up, we've been developing now every new construction property that we have does move forward with this aesthetic or some form thereof. Obviously, we do have a couple of properties in dense urban markets, Nashville downtown, New York City downtown areas, where we need to go more to high-rise and atypical circumstances. But for the most part, when we have the opportunities, we are incorporating this design wherever. It is a flexible design, as you can see, and we are able to accommodate several different areas. The brand is always willing to fit into the communities where we're being implemented, and definitely are willing to work with any overlays that you have as it relates to design aesthetic. And so I just definitely wanted to give you guys the opportunity to have if there are any other questions or concerns related to the design, to absolutely embellish any questions for that. I know one question that does tend to come up is in regards to this exterior material. What exactly is it, right? What is it? What kind of material? It's actually a sintered clay tile. This is actually the look of it. Small samples that I can pass around. It's there are various different applications. There is a porcelain format. There is more of a clay-based format. Nonetheless, they all have similar application, slight reflectivity, but still matte enough to where it's not glossy. It does create a lot of variation in regards to the design, and it helps out with that as well. So it is somewhat constructed like a masonry product, if you will. So it does really enhance instead of just having the straight ether spots that all prototypes have nowadays. So with that, I appreciate your time. I just wanted to explain a little.
Actually, can I just ask him a question? This on the front, I guess the top left-hand picture, does that go above the 4th story?
The lighting area?
This parapet,
This,
where the
yeah.
signage is.
That's correct.
So that would be 5 stories.
So it would be 5
Yes,
stories.
there are no guest rooms or livable or workable spaces there. It's simply an attic or chase space, only for access for the signage, electrical.
So it would be like a roof. It's the roof.
Like roof, exactly.
It should be down 10 feet, it'd be 50 feet then.
It's also for screening for any HVAC and other things like that. We do locate those elevator equipment, we locate behind that parapet to conceal some of those things.
It seems like the building wants to be rotated because of this unique design. You're kind of hiding it in the current site plan. If it was parallel with that auxiliary street, it might be more beneficial.
I don't know if we'd have space for parking then.
Just throwing that out there.
Well, with regards to the parking, because I mean, that's the main reason the applicant's here is tonight. Is there actually, and I'm looking at, is there actually, and I don't know which way the board's gonna go, if there was no waiver granted, is there any way to actually get the required parking on the parcel with the current layout?
There is.
Not as currently designed.
What happens is, we looked at it, this landscaping gets removed, and all this gets removed, this becomes one large parking lot. It's just row.
Okay. So even if the concept of shadow parking was, but the board, again, no idea which way the board wants to go. So there wouldn't be, this, judging by that, there's really no shadow, place we do shadow parking either.
Well, I guess what would happen is if we did show that concept with everything in full, I guess you would consider that the shadow parking, and that it never had to be put in, then you would remove all this landscaping and have to rearrange it. And that would also factor into the required landscaping percentages. So that's,
The scale and size of the building are based on revenue and money. Making it smaller and fewer parking spaces required would be a bad idea.
correct. We have to stay.
I just worry, you know, I understand the owner-operator is banking on the buses bringing a bunch of them, but if that doesn't happen to work out.
On that thought, can the bus parking be made flexible, where it can be used for either buses or cars? Because if you do get buses, they will take the place of cars. But if you don't get buses there and you want to use it for cars, is it possible to think about a plan that you might be able to use it that way?
Yeah, I think so, I don't want to speak, but I think
Can that
if the
whole
bus is
lot
coming in, I
bigger?
think that it's prearranged. Buses that they're gonna have on the night.
Right.
And if they only know that they're gonna have two, we could probably make that a staff park, and 5, 6, 7 spaces.
Also on this type of facility, sometimes you have trucks, you have people with trailers and vans, et cetera, coming in, utilizing the property. We've experienced it in other locations. And the trucks take up several spaces by having this auxiliary lot for buses. If you don't have the buses on a typical weekday, you can put the truck out at that particular location. So I think it's beneficial. I'm looking at the shadow area, not only on the site where the hotel is, but across the street where the bus parking is. And the dentist says, make that to show that you meet the code, and then never build it, just leave it at grip, unless you have to build it.
Could do that as well.
You can get parking on that side, show parking, but never build it.
Correct.
Deliveries, as you mentioned, are typically during the day. Most people are coming to the hotel, after 4 or 5 o'clock, most deliveries are during the day. So just leave it. We'll accommodate you anyway.
How's the board?
I have a question. The hotel can be accessed from both Turner and the new road that's proposed opposite Oakland Avenue?
Yes, our main access, our sign is proposed here, 95% of your traffic will be from 32 down this road. Can they use Turner Road? Sure, someone could. So, Turner does connect to corporate, going around down there, then they can't, because it's one way from Casa Jose going down, it's right away to corporate. So they're just gonna make the loop to corporate, or, they could go out this way, but in reality, they're gonna come down 32, make the right, come in, use the facility, and most likely follow that back out. And go back.
Where would deliveries come from? Either point?
Deliveries,
Probably
most likely,
32.
from 1787 coming in, that direction. I don't think much traffic at all will come this direction. That's the focus.
Thank you.
You have any questions?
Well, I got all kinds of questions, but I think the frontage is the bigger question.
Well, I think right now tonight is the parking is what we've got to kind of give them.
Well, and parking in general, I think there's a lot of parking.
Kind of is jumped to the top of the list.
I like the shadow parking idea. I would even advocate to get fewer parking spaces out of the main parking lot to allow for better circulation and put it out in the bus area. I mean, that parking lot looks pretty dicey with regards to turning radiuses and just general flow. If there were fewer spaces in there and out towards the buses, it would free up a lot. And I would rotate the hotel. And I would do a bunch of other things, but that's another story.
Take your plan and
Wow. Go ahead, Rick.
The one thing that I would say with respect to the parking, I think it's fair to have the board weigh in generally as to where they think that might be with respect to the waiver, but I would advise to hesitate on making